You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about sports in the state of Michigan?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that provides research and statistics about all the Detroit and Michigan sports teams, whether fans like it or not, and detects, exposes, and reveals actual and hidden facts and truth that the mainstream media doesn't want you to know. No junk, no entertainment, no homerism, no coddling, no pop culture, no opinions, no shilling, and no fluff. Head over to our website at michigansportstruth.weebly.com, follow us on Twitter, Periscope, and Instagram at Michigan_Truth, and like and share our verified Facebook page, the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast. Also listen to us on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts via iTunes, Google Play on its podcast mobile app, and Spotify. The Michigan Sports Truth Podcast does not represent or defame any of the teams it covers. It only detects, exposes, and reveals honest, actual, and hidden truth, facts, and statistics about them.
And episode 330 of the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast in audio form is on the air on Spreaker. I'm Taylor Phillips along with Ed Smith. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips and Instagram as well. Follow Ed Smith on Twitter and Instagram at EdSmith313. We have reached it. It is the Big Ten football in the men's season preview 2018. We are ready for some football early on, so let's get down to business, shall we?
Touchdown, Michigan!
Starting off with the Michigan Wolverines. Of course, Shea Patterson, we heard a little bit earlier, will be the Maize and Blues starting quarterback. He beat Brandon Peters in practices and fall camp to earn that quote-unquote once in a lifetime starting position. Also factoring in Grant Newsome, Michigan's, I think, offensive line. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Grant Newsome retiring. Plus, the Michigan Wolverines don't have as easy of a schedule as we thought they would be. They've got Notre Dame on the road to begin with Saturday, September 1st, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on NBC. Their first home game is against the Western Michigan Broncos. They're home against the Wisconsin Badgers October 6th. They head to East Lansing and play the Michigan State Spartans on October 20th on either Fox or FS1. Time to be determined there. And then the Penn State Nittany Lions come into the Big House Saturday, Saturday, November 3rd. And then the Wolverines and the Ohio State Buckeyes in Columbus, the game. 11:24, November 24th at noon. Apparently on ABC or something like that. Yeah.
Actually, it's now on Fox.
It's Fox. Yes, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. But let's start with Shea Patterson, if you don't mind.
Well, with Shea Patterson, it was one of the keys I definitely wanted to talk about with Michigan in terms of their preview for this season. Patterson is their new starting quarterback. Last year, Michigan was going through an essential carousel of QBs for one different sort of reason or another. In the case of Will Spate, it was either injury. Same thing with Brandon Peters, and John O'Korn was just due to talent, skill. That was the reason, a good portion of why Michigan had the QB problems that they did. Spade started the season trying to build off the momentum that he had last year, but again, whether it was injuries or not feeling completely healthy at the end of last year, he tailed off very rapidly, and of course it led to Brandon Peters getting the job, and then he was doing quite well until he got injured, and once John O'Korn stepped in, it was pretty much the end of any type of hopes Michigan fans had of a successful season. So QB play was a big chief problem for why the team went 8-4, 8-5 if you want to count the bowl game last season. So Michigan, of course, looked to address that That's why they tried to move heaven and earth, so to speak, in terms of petitioning the NCAA, making their case for Shea Patterson to not only be transferred, but be instead of also be eligible to play immediately instead of following the usual rule of, if you transfer from one school to another within a year of eligibility, you must sit out that year before you play again. So, it took a while, it took a process, a few months, but this past April, it was officially announced that Patterson would be able to play immediately. So I'm sure that was one key ruling that the Michigan Wolverines were banking on to go their way, and luckily it did. So it just cleared the way for to see who was going to be the starting QB formally. Was it going to be Peters or was it going to be Patterson? I think what we've seen now, as almost expected, I'm pretty sure, Peters was not going to just hand this job over willingly. But, almost as expected, Patterson was named the starting QB. It's going to be interesting to see, though, if this is a case of hope or hype. Because, yes, there is a similar situation of this happening before, where the last time the Wolverines got a transfer of a starting caliber QB from another school. That, of course, led to Jake Rudock having the season that he had, which, more than likely impressed the Lions enough to take a shot on him. Now he's trying to compete for their backup spot at QB on that end. There's that issue. But it could be another case of hype, because we've seen hype about Michigan prospects, especially Michigan prospects at QB before, a.k.a. Shane Morris, that, got all the hype, got all the fizz, but this just didn't quite sizzle when the going was right. So there's also that to worry about. And not to mention the fact that this is a transition for Patterson from the SEC to the Big Ten. He's going to be able to get used to facing different types of defenses as opposed to what he's facing in the SEC. Not to mention crowd environment, going on the road to some of these big games, especially since more than likely, unless something serious happens, he will be the guy under center once Michigan is heading to East Lansing and Columbus this year. And also another thing to consider when talking about Shea Patterson, how he's going to have a good job transitioning from the system that he was at Ole Miss, where it was more similar, so to speak, to what we saw with Johnny Manziel, but Patterson, since he's a little bit taller, he's 6'2", as opposed to Manziel being 6 feet or even shorter than that. So he was able to get away with that, having a good enough body size for that. Interesting to see how that style is going to transfer to Michigan, because Harbaugh, he likes to typically run a pro-style type of offense. But if it calls to it, he will make adjustments to better accommodate his QB's best needs. He did it before in San Francisco with Colin Kaepernick. I wouldn't see there being a surprise or difficulty reason as to why he can't do the same for Shea Patterson in terms of opening up the playbook, seeing how things may go, because last year it seemed more of him trying to force a square peg into a round hole with some of the QBs regarding his system, and it just didn't work out so well. So it'll be very interesting to see if he's going to do the same with Patterson in that regard.
Yep, absolutely. And then you got Grant Newsome retiring. That's a huge loss. He's been dealing with a surgically repaired knee or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe it was an ACL. I believe it was his knee, an ACL injury that he had suffered a year or two before. Newsome has been battling injuries and medical problems for years. So while it was not surprising to see the news that he was, forced to retire due to medical reasons, even though he was still in the college, but still, it's not that surprising when you know his injury history and how much of an uphill battle he's got gone through. But it's still disappointing to see a young career end so quickly, almost without notice. And it does, in a way, is a microcosm, a symbolic microcosm of what has been the issue with Michigan's O-line for a number of years now, even going back to when Hoke was still here. My goodness, you saw how a bad offensive line led to Devin Gardner essentially being traumatized so much to where it hurt his draft stock. It didn't help. It was not at his all best when Rudock was here earlier. I mean, when we saw what happened in the Ohio State game, Joey Bosa almost killed Rudock with a sack that messed up his shoulder or his AC joint. And then, of course, as opposed to, it was a little bit better in 2016, but then, my goodness, just fell off the rails completely last year. Not protecting your QB enough, of course, played into the revolving carousel at QB, whether it was Spade or Peters or Korn or whoever. And also not really setting up the right holes for your running game to properly produce and also milk the clock and have long drives and keep the defense, your best weapon, obviously, off the field and keep them rested, and also try to tire out the other team's defense. That was all predicated upon having at least an adequate offensive line. Michigan didn't even have that last year. And it's very surprising to see a school that is known, for many years and decades as being a school of, hey, if you want to get a high-quality offensive lineman, you go to this school, whether it was Jake Long, or Brandstad or Deerdorf, or so many others, I could go on and on. You get the point. You get the drift here. Michigan has not been known as that since Taylor Lewan, so it's going to be interesting to see how this offensive line is going to look this year as opposed to previous seasons.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Then we hear the. Let's go ahead and get to the schedule. They're at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. The Wolverines Irish rivalry is renewed. It's going to be in South Bend at Notre Dame Stadium Saturday at 7:30. That's September the 1st. It's going to be on NBC. It's going to be an interesting matchup. Michigan's on the road in a hostile environment, and then they're home against the Western Michigan Broncos. Their first home game, they can try to feed off their home crowd off of an almost great Broncos team, and then they're home against the Wisconsin Badgers Saturday, October 6th. That's one of the biggest Big Ten games on the air. Their first Big Ten game's going to be an easy one, no doubt. But then after Wisconsin, 2 weeks after that, they're at MSU, like I mentioned before, October 20th on Fox or FS1. They're home against the Penn State Nittany Lions. That's an interesting hot ticket game to go to for Wolverine fans everywhere, especially the student section. And then the game in Columbus, last meeting in Columbus, what was the rigged game? You know what I mean? Michigan's looking for at least some type of redemption, but also some retribution of madness, if you will. But that's going to be a very pretty tall order and a very tough task.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why people thought Michigan would eventually have the season they had last year was due to their schedule. It wasn't the easiest one in the world. They had to go to Wisconsin and to Penn State as well, in addition to facing Michigan State and Ohio State, albeit at home. Now it's a little bit more of part of the course for this season. Michigan State and Ohio State, once again, 2 tough games, but instead they're going to be on the road. You open the season at Notre Dame. It's a top 15 matchup. College game day is there. Rivalry game, renewal of the rivalry. All sorts of pressure, which can make this, at best a toss-up, and at worst, an underdog game for the Wolverines. And not to mention that they're home for Wisconsin. And let's think about this here. The first part of the schedule, Notre Dame aside, it's practically easy pickings. Western Michigan, SMU, Nebraska, Northwestern, Maryland, just pinpoint, boom. If they beat Notre Dame, they have a good shot at starting 6-0. Then it's this last part, the second half stretch of the season here, where you got Wisconsin. then at Michigan State. Luckily, they do get a bye week after the MSU game, but again, it's not that easy after that. Then you got come right back and have another game against Penn State. Then, after getting a slight break with Rutgers and Indiana, but we all know how those Indiana games go for some reason in the past few seasons. And then you top it off with Ohio State at the very end. It's another reason why some people will be saying, Michigan, they may not get another 10-win season this year, simply because their biggest games and their toughest games are either on the road, as in the case of Notre Dame, MSU, and Ohio State. And, they can't really overlook Penn State so much, even though Saquon Barkley is not there anymore. They still have Trace McSorley. He's a senior. He has experience. He was able to have his way with Michigan's defense last year, along with Saquon. So I'm interested to see if he can do it again, albeit in the big house. And then, of course, Wisconsin, I'm sure they have revenge on their minds from that game, losing that game a couple of years ago to the famous or infamous Jordan Lewis one-handed pick interception game. So, again, that is 4 tough games. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, actually, if you want to say that right then and there. Wisconsin, Penn State, MSU, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. That you could see, shockingly, Michigan losing all 5 of those games, which would be a very, very bad look on Jim Harbaugh. And if you want to say if he wasn't in the hot seat yet, he certainly would be in now. This is year 4. He hasn't had a title to speak of to his name, whether it be conference title or even a division title. He can get to Indy. He has a combined 1-5 against 2 big rivals, MSU and Ohio State. That's combined. And he's adding in Notre Dame this year. And he hasn't really had a big signature road win, unless you want to count Michigan State in 2016 when the team was going to do that laughably bad 3-9 season. So in terms of this season right here, with the schedule that they have, getting off to a good start against Notre Dame is very crucial and key to them, in my opinion, getting at least 9 wins. They can beat with Notre Dame, they have a good shot of getting 9 wins. It's the second half of the season that's going to make it difficult for them to get to 10 or more wins, basically, because it's a real rough stretch. The first 3 were Wisconsin, Michigan State, Penn State, and then at the very end with Ohio State. It gives you a very long, not as very tall task in terms of trying to get the 10 wins. And it's interesting to say, hot seat for Harbaugh, considering the fact that his first 2 seasons were 2 10-win seasons. But again, when you consider the factors I just mentioned, not having a winning record against his rivals, no Big Ten titles, no division titles, not even a sniff of the college football playoff, and no signature road victory, you can understand why some fans have some growing restlessness and impatience with the Harbaugh hype so far. So in terms of all that, it's going to take a great effort, in my view, to quote some of some of those detractors, and the only way to do that would be another 10-win or more season.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Most of Bleacher Report predicted 10-2. 3 of 4 panel experts picked Ohio State to win, and the other Michigan. But I believe at least most, maybe all, picked Michigan State to win their game against Michigan.
I think the MSU game is a little bit more split.
Yep, they are.
If you were to ask me, the dream scenario for Michigan would be, since we're getting ready to essentially predict the record right now, if you were to ask me what would Michigan like as a dream scenario, I would say 11-1. You beat MSU, you beat OSU. That almost all but assuredly guarantees you a spot in the Big Ten championship game, at least. And if you were to get to that, that sets you up to not only win a conference title, but more than likely has you as a team where, if all that were to transpire, not only are you a borderline, playoff team, in my opinion, that should lock you in as a Final Four team. But if with the scenario that I just mentioned. But if you want to be more realistic, I would say their ceiling is 9 wins. Because at the very least, it gives you 1 more than you had last year, and you at least won one of these tough games. Presumably the Notre Dame game, if all this is correct and all is hopeful here. But to really prove to me that this team is capable of 10 wins, you can't just rely on their defense. They need much better production from their offense. Their offensive line needs to show dramatic improvement, which is going to lead into obviously better protection for the QBs, so you don't have too much of a QB carousel like you did last year. And with better O-line means hopefully a better production from your running game. Yes, you lose guys like Eddie McDoom. That's another thing, off-season departures, whether it be transfers, Wilton Spade, Eddie McDoom, among others. Also to switching around and changing your coaching staff, as Jim Harbaugh did with his offensive coordinators, because, something needed to change after the season that we saw from the offense. So Harbaugh recognized that, and he did the moves and made the moves that he had to have happen. So when you factor all that in together, for Michigan to win 9 wins would be their ceiling. Anything past that would be a great overachievement and a great season as opposed to what they went through last year.
Yep. So we're going to see what happens with Michigan, the Wolverines. Good luck to them. Now on to the other team.
Touchdown, MSU!
The Michigan State Spartans. Just one little note, which is an injury report. Like we mentioned earlier, their cornerback Josiah Scott is out approximately 2 months with an unspecified non-contact injury. Still don't know which body part it is that's injured, but that said, Josiah Scott will be missed until November or something like that. Like the beginning of November tops. But they still have Brian Lewerke, Felton Davis.
LJ Scott is still there also.
Yep, LJ Scott. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to
Joe Backel.
Joe Backel. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Joe Backel, Kenny Wilkes, or Willix, however you pronounce his last name, but they still have quality players to represent on a team from last year who was a complete 180 from 2016. Everybody made jokes, myself included, on how awful and how bad that 2016 that went 3-9. So last year they flipped the script. They went 9-3. Then capped it off with a bowl win in the Holiday Bowl against Washington State. So that's 10-3. Mm-hmm. So that was a great turnaround, going from 3 wins to 10 wins, and you beat Michigan again. Some would say in dominating fashion almost, despite Michigan trying to make it a last-minute comeback, but it just fell short. So which made it another victory in this past decade or so. That D'Antonio, under D'Antonio's tenure, the Spartans seemed to own against Michigan. So again, in terms of the absolute pitfall that was 2016, 2017 was a much drastic and much better and much needed improvement for the Spartans. One of the keys is going to be see how can they build off of that. And the best way to build off of that is to put yourself in a position to challenge for another Big Ten championship. That's what had them, got them in the position to go to the playoff a couple seasons back when they won the Big Ten title against Iowa, and then of course let them get in the playoff spot. Albeit we know what happened against Alabama in the bowl game, but still, it was an accomplishment for D'Antonio and the Spartans to do that. It's certainly a heck of a lot more than what Michigan's been able to do in the past few seasons. So there's something that MSU can hang their hat on. But still, in terms of going to get more respect and get back to that caliber of game and have a better performance, you would want to win your conference. So the best way to do that is to beat the teams ahead of you, beat the teams in front of you, and, depending on who you face in Indy and depending on what your ranking is, if it's close enough to that Final Four where you do enough, you win your conference championship, and it's not too much of an ugly game, yeah, you can see yourself as one of those last 4 teams. And absolutely. So MSU, in my opinion, has as much of a chance as Michigan or Michigan State or Penn State or Wisconsin, those teams that I mentioned in that Big Ten, that if they win their conference, they have a good shot of going to the college football playoff. That's just my view on that. Another since we talked about Brian Lewerke, mentioned him rather a little bit earlier, I don't think he's getting much respect, in my opinion. He's not getting much interest, getting much attention. Granted, he's at he was after Connor Cook, but to be more accurate, he was after Tyler O'Connor.
Yes.
So I get that, going the drop off that you had from Connor Cook to Tyler O'Connor was a shell shock for MSU. But I think Brian Lewerke has done a better job of trying to bring them back closer to that Connor Cook stage, so to speak, of winning important games, having an important winning percentage, and winning your most important games against your chief rivals. Lewerke has shown a good dependency of not being seen as a weakness, taking care of the ball, and being shown as a great X factor in some instances with his pocket presence, his scrambling ability, and his skill to make plays happen out of nowhere, even when you least expect it. So Lewerke is going to be a key factor in terms of Michigan State improving off of last season. Now, I say all that despite the fact that we do know that not just the football program, but the school in general has been rocked by a bevy of off-season news. If you want to call them distractions, you can if you want. But in terms of for the football team, this is actually the last thing they wanted to deal with because in the midst of the shadow of the
Larry Nassar
scandal, the Larry Nassar scandal, it then bled into the ESPN investigation that, you can believe whatever side you want to believe, but it did cast a shadow and tainted an image of what Mark D'Antoni represents and represented and wanted for the football program. So, in addition to the basketball program, but for instance, for this case, we're just going to mention only the football program, and also issues such as trying to reopen or the old wounds of the three football players that were kicked off the team once word of their sexual assault got out. Not to mention the John Reschke issue of where he made racist comments online on social media, got kicked off the team, and then inexplicably was brought back by Mark D'Antonio. So there's all of that to factor in, and you have to wonder if this team, have they been coached well enough? Have they had that type of good mental barrier instilled in them by their coaches to push all that noise aside and to solely focus on what they can do for the season? That's still yet to be seen. But they've done pretty well before. Let's see if they can do it again. Another thing that could help them in terms of quoting down all the discontenting voices of, the whispers and the mocking of Michigan State and all that has been what they've done over Michigan. We've seen it ever since Mike Hart made that infamous little brother comment in 2007. MSU has just taken over the rivalry nonstop in the years since. I think, only 2012 and 2016 were the only years where Michigan got a victory. The other years has just been all MSU. And some of those games, and not most of those games, have not even been close. You have to wonder if that trend continues, especially since, this game will be in East Lansing this year. The crowd's going to be fired up. And this is an experienced team that beat Michigan last year. Now is returning most of those starters and has more experience under their belt. So, it is a reason why a lot of people are split in terms of, actually believing that Michigan State has never chance to beat Michigan again this year was the reasons and the factors I just mentioned. So when you tie all that in together, what do you think of how their overall record is going to be? Because when you look at their schedule, nowhere near as difficult as Michigan's. They don't even have to face Wisconsin until presumably the Big Ten title game. Yes, they got to deal with Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State, but that's it, really, in terms of their toughest games, the toughest teams they face in that schedule, because they're facing the likes of Utah State, Arizona State.
That's on the road.
Yeah, but, the teams that I just mentioned off, no offense against your Chips, Taylor, but that is part of the little system of rapport that MSU is going to be able to feast off of to build their resume to get them at least 6 to 8 wins before going into their big tough matchups against Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, respectively.
I've experienced Michigan State beating Central Michigan a few times. Don't worry about it. I'm not worried. I'm probably gonna expect Michigan State to beat Central Michigan again this year. I'm not surprised.
At least you have a more upbeat attitude about it.
Right.
But looking at all of that, I think for MSU, the expectation for them to me, would be a regular season of 10 wins. So it puts them in position to get that 11th win in the postseason. Again, a better building block. Again, a much more improved season off of last year than which this year as opposed to the year before. And if you were to say get 10 wins in the regular season, that gives you a good outside shot at being one of those Final Four teams in, especially if you win your conference championship. So if you're Michigan State, the goal of the season would be 10 victories, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good one. Kind of like Michigan's predicted record, 10-2 in the regular season. Michigan State. So we're both gonna predict Michigan and Michigan State both to finish 10-2 in the regular season, and who knows who's gonna make the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis at the Lucas Oil Stadium.
And not to mention that since we're both predicting, basically we're both picking both teams to go 10-2. It's going to make that October 20th game a real swing game, as opposed to that actually may go down to preventing one of these teams from reaching that 10-win plateau. When you think about it,
yeah, there's probably almost no momentum when you're trying to fight for one of the best records in the Big Ten. You don't give up no matter what.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, and on paper, Jim Harbaugh and Mark D'Antonio appear to be the two biggest head coaches in college football in our state of Michigan. Of course, they've got to be. Of course, Urban Meyer's not suspended for the game, so apparently the Ohio State Buckeyes are going to win the game. Of course, it's in Columbus.
Yes, but when you think about it, if let's say, and we'll get into this in full detail on Sunday, but in a sense, I am kind of glad that he only got the suspension that he got, because that way, should Michigan were to do the unthinkable and beat Ohio State this season, you wouldn't get so many people deriding it like they did the 2011 season, saying, oh, you only won because you have to face Luke Fickell. You know what I mean? Whereas this one, hey, you can't say that if we won, we didn't beat him without Urban Meyer, because he already served his suspension. So that is one thing to keep in the back of my mind.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So that's it. That is the 2018 Big Ten Football in the Mitten season preview for both the Michigan Wolverines and the Michigan State Spartans. So episode 331 coming up Sunday at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Ed, excellent job. That was much needed on a night like Thursday night. So we'll talk to you and Buck when he returns, Buck Gino, Sunday at 10:30.
Absolutely. You'll be able to fully get more in depth with the Urban Meyer news on Sunday. Do our Mac in the Mitten preview as opposed to our Big Ten preview. And we'll be able to cover in Week 3 recap of the Lions preseason.
Oh, yeah. The Lions take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa. Or St. Petersburg, if you were.
And a reminder for people, it's going to be on your local CBS station 62. So it's not going to be on Channel 2 local box. It's going to be on your local CBS station.
Yep. 9 and 10 News up here in Cadillac. WWTV DT in Cadillac. WWUP-TV DT in Sault Ste. Marie, way up north.
And, of course, around southeastern Michigan and your Metro Detroit areas, WWJ on Channel 62 on CBS.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you mentioned that already, but yep, absolutely. So that's it. Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and our entire podcast on social media and have their friends share that as well, because we want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is searching for a wider online audience that is fans of sports, especially our teams in the state of Michigan, including the Wolverines and the Spartans. So please spread the word about the Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, via iTunes, Google Play, on its podcast app, and Spotify, its verified Facebook page, the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast, its Twitter, Periscope, and Instagram accounts at Michigan_Truth. I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me at Twitter at DT2Phillips, at BuckGino3rd, and Ed Smith at EdSmith313. We'll talk to you next week in episode 331.
All right, looking forward to it. Take care, Taylor.
Yep, thanks. Thanks very much for listening, downloading, and sharing TTFN. Ta-ta for now. Stay smart, everyone.
The Michigan Sports Truth podcast does not represent or defame any of the teams it covers. It only detects, exposes, and reveals honest, actual, and hidden truth, facts, and statistics about them.
Transmission complete.